It was a warm afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the quiet suburban streets. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, with children playing in yards and neighbors tending to gardens. A young child walked along the sidewalk, backpack slung over one shoulder, swinging a small book in their hand. The world felt safe and ordinary, and the child moved with the carefree confidence that comes with innocence. The child had just finished a long day at school, where lessons had stretched on and the chatter of friends had filled the hallways. They had been looking forward to this part of the day, the simple walk home where they could enjoy the gentle breeze and the sound of birds in the trees. Their steps were light, almost bouncing, as they passed familiar houses and waved to a neighbor watering plants. Nothing in this moment suggested anything was wrong. From across the street, a man sat on a worn bench in front of a small convenience store. He appeared casual at first glance, dressed in plain clothes, hands stuffed in his pockets and head tilted slightly as he watched the neighborhood go about its routine. But there was a quiet intensity in his gaze, a focus that seemed out of place. His eyes followed the child as they walked, and the way he leaned forward subtly gave away more than his relaxed posture suggested. The man's attention to the child was deliberate, almost calculating. He stayed just enough in the shadows of trees and parked cars to avoid immediate notice, blending into the background like he belonged. To any casual observer, he might have seemed like a passerby, simply waiting or resting, but something about the way he watched made the air feel heavier without anyone noticing. The child, meanwhile, was lost in their own thoughts, remembering a funny incident in class and thinking about the snack waiting at home. They hummed a tune softly, unaware of the eyes following them. Their backpack bounced with each step and they paused briefly to adjust the strap, then continued walking, stepping around a small crack in the sidewalk. The rhythm of their movements was comforting in its normalcy, a simple reminder of everyday life. A few doors down, a woman leaned out of her kitchen window, chopping vegetables while glancing outside. She noticed the child walking and smiled, thinking about her own memories of children growing up in the neighborhood. Her attention was momentarily drawn to the man on the bench. She paused, her hand still on the knife, feeling a flicker of unease. He didn't belong in her usual observations of the neighborhood. He wasn't familiar, and there was something in his manner that made her stomach tighten. She shrugged it off, telling herself he was probably just waiting for someone, and returned to her cooking. The child approached the small park at the end of the street, a place where neighbors often gathered and children played. The swing set swayed gently in the breeze, the sound of creaking metal blending with birdsong. The child slowed their pace, looking at the empty swings and imagining how much fun it would be to come back with friends. Their imagination was alive, painting scenes of laughter and games that would fill the space in the coming days. Meanwhile, the man on the bench shifted slightly, adjusting his position to get a better view. His movements were careful, deliberate, and almost imperceptible. He seemed to be calculating, planning his next steps in the quiet, ordinary world that went on around him. Nothing about the neighborhood's calm touched him. He was focused solely on the child, who remained blissfully unaware of the attention. At the same time, a delivery driver turned onto the street, his van rolling slowly as he scanned the house numbers. He noticed the child and the man on the bench but didn't think much of it. To him, it was a normal scene, a child walking home and a man sitting outside a store. He hummed along with a song on the radio and continued driving, oblivious to the tension that was building subtly across the street. The child reached the end of the park and stopped for a moment to watch a squirrel scampering up a tree. The small creature's movements were quick and lively, capturing the child's attention and drawing a small laugh from them. It was a brief moment of joy, a tiny spark of innocence in an afternoon that had otherwise gone unnoticed. Yet in that same moment, the man on the bench shifted again, his gaze following every motion, every expression. There was a sense of quiet anticipation in his eyes, a focus that seemed to measure and weigh the child's every movement. A neighbor walked their dog along the sidewalk, enjoying the late-day sun. The dog sniffed at the grass and wagged its tail, pulling slightly on the leash. The neighbor noticed the child and waved, calling out a friendly greeting. The child waved back, smiling brightly. The dog barked once, and the neighbor laughed, shaking their head at the dog's antics. For a brief moment, the world felt entirely normal, entirely safe. Yet beneath this normalcy, the tension lingered, almost invisible but present, The man on the bench adjusted his position again, shifting his weight and brushing a hand against his jacket. He watched the child with a patience that made the moment stretch, the quiet stillness of the neighborhood masking the danger that existed in plain sight. He was careful, making sure no one else noticed his intent, blending into the background like a shadow that moved with purpose. The child continued walking, unaware that they were being observed so closely. Their steps were confident, their mind occupied with thoughts of home, of snacks, of the stories they would share with their family later. They didn't notice the subtle ways the man adjusted, the way he seemed to measure distance and opportunity with quiet calculation. Everything seemed ordinary, but the ordinary had a shadow. A few more neighbors appeared along the street, children returning from school, parents carrying groceries, a teenager riding a bike. They passed the child and the man on the bench exchanging nods and brief greetings. To all of them, it was a scene of everyday life, completely normal, completely safe. And yet, the man's presence was a dark thread running through the ordinary fabric of the neighborhood, unseen but real. The child approached a familiar corner, a place where they would turn to head toward home. They paused for a moment, looking both ways, then took the turn, their small feet pattering against the pavement. The man on the bench noticed the movement, leaning slightly forward, his focus sharpening. There was an intensity in his gaze now, a silent calculation that made the tension almost tangible. He seemed to be waiting for the perfect moment, unaware that life often has a way of intervening. Unseen by the child, a figure appeared down the street. A passerby, a local resident, had just stepped out of their house to take in the afternoon air. They noticed the man on the bench, noting the oddity of his lingering presence. Something about the way he watched the child made the passerby pause, their instincts nudging them to pay attention. It was a fleeting moment, a small flicker of awareness that would soon prove crucial. The child walked a few more steps, humming softly, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the sound of the leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. They were completely unaware of the eyes on them, unaware that a dangerous intention had been present, even if only for a brief moment. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, ordinary, untroubled, and yet a tension hovered quietly, like a shadow waiting for daylight to fade. As the child neared the end of the street, the passerby moved closer to the bench, pretending to adjust their bag, casually shifting their position to get a better view. Their presence was subtle, but it created a line of defense the man on the bench had not noticed. The man's focus did not waver, but the balance of the situation was shifting imperceptibly, inch by inch. The sun continued its slow descent, bathing the street in a warm, golden light. The child paused again, looking up at the sky for a moment, then resumed walking, taking each step with the rhythm of normal life. The neighborhood, with all its calm and everyday activity, remained unaware of the tension that had quietly built. The predator had made his move, calculated and patient, but the first signs of vigilance were beginning to emerge. The passerby kept a steady gaze, ready to act if necessary, their awareness heightened by the subtle cues of danger. The child remained blissfully unaware, moving with the innocence of someone untouched by the darker intentions that sometimes lurk in the world. And the man on the bench continued his watch, unaware that the ordinary rhythm of the neighborhood was beginning to form a shield around the child. The quiet street held its breath for a moment, the ordinary life of the neighborhood continuing around the tension that remained almost invisible. The child's journey home, so simple and everyday, had become a scene where danger and vigilance were about to collide. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, shadows that would soon play a role in a story of bravery, attention, and the protection of innocence. The stage was set, the players in place, and the ordinary day continued with the calmness that makes the extraordinary moment stand out. The child's walk home was simple, yet it carried the weight of anticipation, the kind that comes before a moment of action that could change everything. Life in the neighborhood moved on, unaware of the drama quietly unfolding in plain sight, in the golden light of a peaceful afternoon. The child continued down the quiet street, swinging their backpack slightly and humming softly. They passed houses with well-kept lawns, flowers in bloom, and fences painted bright colors. Everything seemed ordinary, safe, and familiar. The sun had begun its slow descent, and the warm light made the neighborhood feel almost magical. Birds chirped from the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. The child felt calm, unaware that the day was about to take a turn. The man on the bench had not moved for a long time. His eyes had never left the child, and now as the child walked further away from the main street, he began to follow, keeping his distance. He moved quietly, careful not to attract attention, slipping behind parked cars and stepping lightly over patches of uneven pavement. His presence was deliberate, calculated, each movement measured. He kept a safe distance so no one would suspect his intentions, blending seamlessly into the normal rhythm of the neighborhood. The child, meanwhile, was thinking about the snack waiting at home, the stories they would tell their family about the day, and a small toy that had recently caught their attention in a shop window. They occasionally glanced around, enjoying the sight of their familiar surroundings, not noticing the man trailing them. The world was bright, ordinary, and full of small joys, which made the lurking danger seem even more out of place. Around the corner, a group of children were finishing up a game of tag on a small playground. Laughter rang through the air, carrying across the street. The child paused for a moment watching the game, feeling tempted to join but remembered they had to get home first. The man slowed his pace to avoid standing out, waiting for the right moment, his eyes locked on the child. He was patient, studying the child's routine, noticing how they paused at the corner and looked both ways before continuing down the street. From a nearby driveway, a woman noticed the man walking behind the child. She had been washing her car, and her attention had drifted toward the street. Something about him felt off. He didn't appear to be in a hurry, and his gaze seemed fixed, almost unnatural. Her heart gave a little jolt, and she instinctively watched him more closely. But she wasn't entirely sure why. Nothing concrete had happened yet. She stepped inside to grab her phone, thinking she might call the police if the man's behavior didn't change. The child had reached a section of the street with fewer houses and more open spaces. Trees lined the sidewalk, casting long shadows that stretched across the pavement. A stray cat darted across the path, and the child giggled at its quick movements. They bent down to watch it, momentarily distracted, unaware that the man had also adjusted his pace to match theirs. Every subtle pause the child took gave him time to plan and position himself. The air was calm, but tension hung invisibly between them. A neighbor, returning from a short walk with their dog, noticed the interaction. The dog sniffed in the direction of the man, letting out a small bark. The neighbor turned, curious, and saw the child and the man behind them. Their instincts told them something wasn't right, but they couldn't be sure. They slowed their pace, pretending to adjust the leash, all the while keeping a careful eye on the two. It was a small action, barely noticeable, but it added a layer of protection for the child that neither the predator nor the child were aware of. The child, now closer to a more isolated part of the street, began to feel a slight unease. They looked over their shoulder, noticing the man walking behind them. He seemed ordinary at first glance, but there was something persistent in the way he followed. The child quickened their pace, gripping the straps of their backpack a little tighter. A small knot of worry formed in their chest, the first hint that something was amiss. The man noticed the change in pace, but didn't panic. He continued moving with the same quiet, controlled manner. He was not yet aggressive, only calculating, keeping his eyes on the child and analyzing every small movement. His intent was clear to him, but the subtle increase in tension from the child started to disrupt his plans. He needed to act carefully, not drawing attention while waiting for the perfect moment. The neighbor with the dog stepped closer to the path, now pretending to tie the leash to a nearby post. They kept their eyes on the man, the child, and the surrounding area. Their presence added another layer of safety without the child realizing it. It was a quiet form of vigilance, the kind that doesn't demand attention but has the potential to make all the difference. The man shifted slightly, sensing another set of eyes, but he continued forward, unwilling to abandon his plan just yet. The child reached the small alleyway that led toward home, the space narrowing and shadows deepening. They paused to look around, feeling a sudden desire to hurry. The ordinary sounds of the neighborhood, the birds, the distant chatter, the gentle rustling of leaves, suddenly felt quieter, as though the world had muted in anticipation. The man quickened his steps just slightly, trying to close the distance but still careful not to draw attention. Every move was deliberate, measured, and unseen. A passerby, an older man taking a short stroll after work, noticed the scene from across the street. He saw the man following the child and the subtle unease in the child's steps. Something didn't feel right. He stopped, pretending to check his watch, but kept his eyes on the situation. His attention was quiet, unnoticed, but it became another piece of the safety net forming around the child. The child's steps grew faster as they approached the end of the alley. The shadows deepened and a slight breeze rustled the leaves. The world that had felt ordinary and safe was beginning to feel uncertain. The child glanced behind, seeing the man closer than before. Panic began to creep in, subtle but undeniable. Their heart raced and they considered running, but they were unsure of the best way to do it without drawing attention. The man sensed the increase in the child's anxiety and adjusted accordingly. He remained calm, methodical, and patient, trying to find a way to approach without alarming anyone else. His focus was sharp, his movements calculated. He did not realize that his careful steps were being countered by a growing network of unseen vigilance. The neighbor in the driveway, the person with the dog, and the older man across the street. The child took a deep breath, trying to calm themselves. They reminded themselves that they knew the streets, that they knew the path home, and that nothing truly dangerous had ever happened before. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered. Their mind raced with possible escape routes, ways to get home safely, and thoughts of the people who might be nearby to help. It was a moment of instinct, of intuition that something was wrong. As the child turned a corner, the alley opened to a wider street where more neighbors could see them. They slowed slightly, relieved by the sight of familiar houses and people. The man hesitated, recognizing that his calculated plan was becoming riskier. He had to decide quickly, but the environment was no longer as isolated as he had thought. The quiet vigilance around the child had formed an invisible barrier, one that he had not anticipated. The child's pace remained brisk, moving toward the open street. They passed a mailbox, a bicycle propped against a fence, and a small garden where a neighbor was planting flowers. Each small, ordinary detail reminded the child of the normalcy of life, grounding them even as anxiety built. The man adjusted, trying to find a way to continue, but the increasing number of observers made him cautious. The ordinary rhythm of the neighborhood was working against him, creating obstacles he had not planned for. The passerby with the dog shifted slightly, moving closer to the path. The older man across the street stepped forward, pretending to look at something on his phone while keeping a watchful eye. The neighbor in the driveway held their phone, ready to call for help if needed. Each of these small actions added pressure on the man, making it clear that any misstep would be noticed. The child, sensing the change in the environment, felt a renewed sense of determination. They tightened their grip on the backpack and focused on the path ahead, relying on the familiar surroundings to guide them. The combination of instinct, awareness, and the subtle protection forming around them created a network of safety they were not fully aware of. The man's patience and calculation were being challenged by forces he had not accounted for. Finally, the child reached a spot where the street opened fully into the neighborhood, where other children played and neighbors were outside. Relief began to wash over them, though their awareness remained heightened. The man hesitated, realizing that his plan was becoming increasingly difficult to execute without drawing attention. He adjusted his pace, unsure of how to proceed. At that moment, the ordinary day continued around them, filled with light, laughter, and movement. Yet beneath it all, a subtle struggle had begun, one of vigilance against intent, awareness against danger. The child moved forward, the man followed cautiously, and the network of neighbors and passers-by remained alert, ready to intervene if necessary. The stage was set for the next critical moments, where ordinary life and the careful attention of ordinary people would collide in a quiet but decisive way. The child was now closer to the more open area of the neighborhood, where the houses were larger and spaced a little farther apart. The sidewalks were clean, the lawns freshly mown, and flowers bloomed in the gardens. The sunlight had softened into the warm hues of late afternoon, making the entire street glow in a gentle light. Despite the calm appearance of the surroundings, tension lingered in the air, invisible to most but felt in every careful step the child took. The man, who had been following quietly, was growing impatient. He could sense that his calculated approach was being watched, although he did not know by whom. He adjusted his pace, trying to appear casual, blending even more into the environment. He looked around, scanning for anyone who might be paying attention. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, and his instinct told him that the situation was more complicated than he had anticipated. Meanwhile, the child noticed that their surroundings had changed. The street opened up and more neighbors were visible from windows, porches, and yards. Their mind flickered with a sense of caution, an intuition that something was not quite right. They slowed slightly, glancing over their shoulder again, seeing the man a short distance behind. A knot of worry tightened in their chest, but they reminded themselves that they knew the area and that help could be close. One of the neighbors, a middle-aged woman tending to her flower beds, had noticed the man walking behind the child. She watched silently, pretending to adjust a plant, her hands in the soil as she kept her eyes on him. She felt a sense of unease, though she didn't know exactly what danger might be present. Her instincts told her to act if needed, to be ready to intervene or call for help. For now, she simply observed, her presence a quiet form of protection. The child reached a corner where the street forked into two paths. One path led to their home, familiar and safe, while the other led toward a less populated area. They paused, considering which route to take, and instinctively chose the familiar path home. The man noted the choice, his mind running calculations, but he did not react immediately. His patience had limits, yet he had to remain cautious. A passerby, a man walking his dog, approached the area from the opposite direction. The dog barked softly, sniffing the air, and the man's eyes fell on the man following the child. He paused, pretending to adjust the leash, all while assessing the situation. The presence of another adult, seemingly casual but alert, made the man hesitate, unsure of how to continue without attracting attention. The child began walking down the chosen path, each step measured and deliberate. They focused on the familiar sights, the painted fences, the colorful mailbox, the tree with a swing hanging from its branch. These small, comforting details helped them stay calm, despite the uneasy feeling that had begun to build. Their senses were alert but not panicked, a balance that often comes from a mixture of intuition and careful observation. The man followed more cautiously, aware that any sudden movement could reveal his intentions. He had expected the child to be unaware and vulnerable, but the growing presence of neighbors and passers-by was complicating his plan. He was forced to move more slowly, blending in with the normal flow of the street. Each step was deliberate, calculated, and yet increasingly frustrating. From a nearby porch, a woman was reading a book but kept one eye on the street. She noticed the child and the man following them. Something about his lingering gaze and measured movements felt wrong. She set her book down quietly, keeping herself low while paying closer attention. Her mind raced through the possibilities, thinking of how she could help without causing a scene or putting herself in danger. The child reached the small bridge that crossed a narrow stream, one of the last open areas before their home street. They paused to look at the water, feeling a momentary sense of calm as they watched leaves float by. But in that brief pause, the man moved slightly closer, trying to take advantage of the moment, unaware that other eyes were watching him. The balance of the situation was fragile, and any misstep could tip it in favor of safety or danger. The neighbor with the dog had followed a few steps behind, staying within a reasonable distance but ready to act. The woman on the porch had moved a little closer to the edge, pretending to adjust her book while her focus remained on the man. Another neighbor, returning from an afternoon walk, noticed the scene from across the street. He did not rush in but kept a steady, watchful gaze. Each observer added a layer of protection, though none of them made their presence obvious to the predator. The child started moving again, walking briskly now. Their heart was beating faster, but they kept their focus on the path ahead, on the familiar landmarks that marked their route home. They were aware of the man following, but the attention of others provided a subtle reassurance even if they did not fully understand it. The ordinary neighborhood, full of everyday life, had quietly created a shield around them. The man grew increasingly anxious. His plan, which had seemed simple and foolproof in his mind, was now encountering unexpected resistance. He had not anticipated that ordinary neighbors and passers-by would act as silent guardians. He paused for a moment, assessing the situation, trying to find a way to continue without alerting anyone. His patience was wearing thin and frustration crept into his movements. The child reached the next familiar corner, a place where their street joined the main road. They slowed slightly, breathing a little easier, seeing familiar faces and the approach of more people. The shadows cast by the late afternoon sun stretched across the pavement, and the child used them as markers, keeping a mental map of their surroundings. Their movements were careful, each step deliberate, guided by intuition and observation. At that moment, the man made a subtle shift, trying to close the distance. He underestimated the quiet vigilance surrounding the child. The neighbor on the porch leaned slightly forward, pretending to reach for a phone, and the man with the dog stepped closer, shifting his position to be more visible. The older man across the street moved along the sidewalk, pretending to check a mailbox, but his eyes remained on the man following the child. Each action, though seemingly ordinary, created obstacles for the predator. The child noticed the change in the man's pace, the subtle increase in tension in the air. Their instincts told them to keep moving, to stay close to populated areas, and to remain aware. They felt a mixture of fear and determination, a clear focus on safety without panic. Their mind scanned the surroundings, noting every person and movement that could provide help if needed. The man attempted to adjust his approach, keeping his movements slow and controlled. He tried to appear casual, blending with the environment, but the multiple layers of vigilance around the child made it increasingly difficult. Every step he took was watched by someone, even if they were pretending to be occupied. The balance of power was shifting away from him, though he did not yet fully realize it. The child reached the small park at the end of the street, a place where children often played and neighbors gathered. They felt a sense of relief at seeing the familiar swings, the sandbox, and the benches. The presence of other people, including children and adults, made them feel safer. Their pace quickened slightly, a mixture of confidence and urgency guiding their steps. The man, seeing the growing number of observers, hesitated. His initial plan was failing, and he began to calculate his next move. He was aware of the increasing difficulty of approaching the child unnoticed. Frustration and urgency mixed in his expression, though outwardly he maintained a calm demeanor. His options were limited, and the safety net around the child was closing in. The neighbors, passers-by, and the woman on the porch had all taken subtle positions to ensure they could intervene if necessary. Each movement, though seemingly ordinary, formed a protective circle. The child moving through this space was unknowingly shielded by the vigilance and awareness of those around them. The predator was now forced to confront the reality that his intentions could not be carried out easily. As the child moved past the park and toward the main street, the situation reached a critical point. The predator realized he had no clear path, no opportunity to act without being noticed. The layers of vigilance, ordinary and unassuming, created an environment where his presence was countered at every turn. He was forced to pause, reassess, and confront the growing obstacles. The child, still focused on reaching home, walked briskly, each step guided by instinct and familiarity. They passed neighbors chatting on porches, children playing, and people walking dogs. The sense of community, everyday life, and the simple rhythm of the neighborhood acted as a shield, keeping them safe without them fully understanding it. Finally, the man made a decision. He realized that his plan could not succeed without drawing attention and risking confrontation. His movement slowed, frustration evident in the slight tension of his body. The balance of the situation had shifted irreversibly. The child, guided by instinct, vigilance, and the quiet protection of those around them, continued safely down the street, inching closer to home and safety. The stage was now set for the final confrontation, the moment when vigilance would directly intervene and the child would be fully protected. The ordinary neighborhood, with its casual observers and alert neighbors, had transformed into a network of quiet heroes. The man's intentions were thwarted not by sudden action alone, but by the steady, unassuming presence of those who paid attention, stayed aware, and acted when needed. The ordinary afternoon had become a scene of suspense, preparation, and imminent resolution. The child had almost reached the main street, a wider road lined with homes, shops, and familiar faces. The sound of laughter and conversation from other children and neighbors filled the air. The afternoon sun had begun its descent, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. Despite the calm appearance of the street, the tension that had been building all along was about to reach its breaking point. The man, seeing the child entering the more populated area, hesitated. His plan, which had seemed carefully calculated and straightforward, was collapsing. The presence of neighbors, passers-by, and the quiet vigilance of the community had limited his options. He adjusted his pace, trying to stay casual, but his frustration and urgency were beginning to show in small, subtle ways. His eyes darted around, assessing the situation and searching for a way to proceed without being noticed. The child, moving with cautious confidence, was unaware of the network of attention surrounding them. They could feel a slight unease, an instinct that something wasn't right, but they also felt the comfort of familiar streets and faces. Their pace quickened slightly, their mind focused on reaching the safety of home and the comfort of family. Each step was deliberate, guided by instinct and awareness. From a nearby porch, a woman who had been observing the situation quietly moved closer. She pretended to water her plants, but her eyes never left the man. Her attention to detail was subtle but precise. She noted every shift in his posture, every glance, and every small step. Another neighbor, who had been returning from a short walk with a dog, positioned himself at a spot where he could clearly see the path the child was taking. The older man across the street, still pretending to check the mailbox, moved into a better vantage point. The layers of quiet vigilance were now fully in place. As the child walked further along the street, the man made a sudden move, trying to close the distance. His hand reached out slightly, a small gesture that revealed his intent. It was at that moment that the first of the vigilant neighbors stepped forward, not aggressively, but clearly enough to be seen. The man froze, surprise and frustration flickering across his face. He had not anticipated that someone would intervene so directly, even in such an ordinary and unassuming manner. The child, sensing the sudden change, stopped briefly. Their heart raced, but they stayed calm, noticing the neighbor who had stepped into view. Relief washed over them in an instant, knowing they were no longer alone. The predator realized he had been noticed and assessed the risk. Panic mixed with anger in his expression, but the surrounding vigilance left him with no room to act without drawing attention from multiple observers. Another neighbor, a middle-aged woman, called out casually, as if speaking to someone else, drawing further attention to the man. Her voice was calm but carried authority, a subtle warning that someone was aware of the situation. The man's attempt to remain unnoticed had failed. He looked around, noting the increasing number of people who were now aware of his actions. His plans were unraveling rapidly. The child, standing just beyond the reach of the man, felt a combination of fear and relief. Their body was tense, ready to move if necessary, but their mind recognized the safety now surrounding them. The ordinary presence of neighbors, each aware in their own quiet way, had created a protective barrier. The predator's frustration grew, and he realized he had no clear path to approach the child. The man started to retreat slightly, considering abandoning his attempt entirely. He scanned the street, noting each vigilant observer and calculating the risk. The child's position, coupled with the protective presence of ordinary people, made any further action nearly impossible. The tension in the air was thick, a mix of relief, vigilance, and lingering fear. At that moment, a neighbor who had been watching from a distance stepped closer to the child, offering a hand and a reassuring smile. The gesture was simple but powerful, providing a clear signal of safety. The child took the hand, their trust in the stranger immediate and instinctive. The predator, seeing the growing circle of protection around the child, finally understood that his plan was completely foiled. He had no opportunity to act without being noticed by multiple witnesses. The predator's hesitation turned into a slow retreat. He moved cautiously back down the street, his eyes darting around, calculating the risk of being seen or confronted. The network of vigilance remained intact, ensuring that he could not approach the child again without immediate consequence. Each neighbor remained in position, their quiet but deliberate presence keeping the situation under control. The child, now fully aware of the protection around them, felt a sense of safety they had not felt moments before. Their heart rate slowed slightly, and the tension in their shoulders eased. They moved forward confidently, guided by the supportive presence of neighbors and the knowledge that the street, though ordinary, had become a place of security. The predator, realizing that his intentions had been entirely thwarted, turned and began walking away, finally leaving the area. The observers remained alert for a few moments, ensuring he did not attempt to circle back or approach from another direction. The ordinary afternoon, filled with calm and routine, had been disrupted, but vigilance had prevailed. Neighbors exchanged brief, understated looks of understanding, acknowledging the small but significant role each had played. No words were necessary. The quiet coordination of attention, observation, and presence had been enough to ensure the child's safety. It was a moment of collective awareness, a demonstration of the power of ordinary people paying attention to their surroundings. The child continued toward home, their steps now light and confident. Each familiar landmark, each painted fence and flowering garden, reinforced the sense of safety. They did not fully understand how close the danger had come, but they felt secure, protected by the vigilance of the community around them. The warmth of the late afternoon sun added to the sense of comfort and relief. The predator's retreat marked the end of the immediate threat, but the neighborhood remained alert. Ordinary people who had quietly observed now relaxed, but their awareness lingered, a subtle readiness to act if ever needed again. The child reached their doorstep safe and unharmed, and the protective circle dissolved naturally as the situation came to an end. Inside the home, the child's family welcomed them with smiles, unaware of the close call outside. The child recounted parts of the afternoon, mentioning the brief feeling of unease but not the full extent of the danger. The ordinary, everyday life of the neighborhood had continued around them, filled with small acts of vigilance and quiet heroism. The neighbors returned to their routines, tending gardens, walking dogs, or relaxing on porches. Each remained quietly proud, knowing that their attention had made a difference. The predator was gone, and the community had proven that ordinary awareness, care, and presence could prevent harm. The ordinary street, so often taken for granted, had become a place of protection and quiet courage. The sun continued its descent, casting long shadows and soft light over the neighborhood. Children played, parents conversed, and life returned to its usual rhythm. The tension of the afternoon had passed, leaving behind lessons in vigilance, awareness, and the power of ordinary people acting together. The child, safe and comforted, had unknowingly benefited from a web of quiet heroes, each performing small acts that together created a strong shield of protection. The predator's failure served as a reminder of the importance of paying attention, of noticing subtle signs, and of being ready to act when needed. The child's experience, while not fully understood in the moment, became a part of the fabric of the neighborhood's story, a quiet testament to the impact of care, awareness, and vigilance in everyday life. The ordinary day, once disrupted, had been restored, and safety, thanks to quiet heroism, had prevailed. The child sat at the kitchen table, finishing a snack while recounting the day to a family member. They spoke of school, of friends, and the little adventures along the way home. There was a quiet pride in their voice, a sense of resilience born from the knowledge that they had faced unease and had remained safe. The details of what had occurred outside were not fully understood, but the child could feel that something unusual had happened. The comforting presence of family made them feel secure and grounded, and the events of the afternoon began to settle in their mind as a story of ordinary bravery,